Welcome back, travelers. It looks like one of the upcoming Snezhnaya characters may do far more than simply use the new stellar reaction system. She could actually rewrite the rules of the reaction itself. Today, we're going to break down everything currently being said about Mythia, Valerie, and Danika, look at the abilities that have been reported so far, and use those details to figure out what they might tell us about the Cryo Sovereign. But before we get into the characters, we need to understand how stellar conduct currently works, because this is exactly where Mythia seems to break the rules. When Cryo and Electro are applied to the same enemy, the normal reaction would be superconduct. However, if your team contains a character with the stellar keystone, that reaction is replaced by stellar conduct. At the moment, the characters associated with this system are Sandrone and the Cryo Traveler. When stellar conduct is triggered, a starlight prism is created for 7 seconds, generating a special field around it. And that field is essentially the core of the entire mechanic. Enemies inside the field have their physical resistance reduced, while your team receives buffs to Cryo and Electro damage. On top of that, Cryo and Electro attacks performed inside the field are recorded as stacks, and the more stacks you build, the higher the damage multiplier becomes. In other words, the longer you stay inside the field and continue attacking, the more value you get from the system. But here's the most important part: the reaction itself currently does not directly contribute to the damage. The actual damage comes from the stellar conduct damage dealt by the characters, while the Cryo and Electro reaction is essentially just the trigger that activates the system. Keep that in mind, because Mythia appears to be coming in specifically to break that trigger. Mythia is reportedly a 5-star Electro character who is expected to arrive in version 7.2. Her story began immediately after version 7.0 launched, when players noticed that she appeared to have a normal vision. Later, Hoyoverse issued a clarification stating that the display was incorrect and that she actually possesses a stellar keystone. This is important because that particular detail is not merely based on an early leak, it was officially corrected by the developers themselves. As for her gameplay, the current information comes from comparing multiple sources. Mythia reportedly scales with elemental mastery rather than attack. Her elemental skill appears to have both a tap and hold version, suggesting that she may have 2 different ways of playing her. But the biggest feature is what happens while Mythia is actively on the field. During her field time, Cryo and Electro reactions reportedly stop being merely the gateway into stellar conduct and instead begin dealing stellar reaction damage themselves. The field may also start dealing damage directly, with its behavior being compared to a stellar swirl-like effect. This means that Mythia could potentially deal character-based stellar conduct damage while the field simultaneously deals reaction damage. There is another important mechanic as well. Once elemental application reaches a certain number of times, the starlight prism in the center of the field may launch itself and deal additional reaction damage. So instead of relying purely on direct character damage, Mythia appears to shift the system toward a hybrid model that combines direct damage with reaction damage. This also explains why elemental mastery is so important to her. However, there is a major condition attached to all of this: the reaction rewrite only works while Mythia is on the field. Once she leaves the field, the reaction modification stops, and she returns to being an Electro character whose main purpose is applying Electro to activate stellar conduct. In that sense, her role could be somewhat similar to Yae Miko. She would still be useful and flexible, but her true potential seems to come from actually taking field time. Her role may also change depending on how much investment you put into her. At lower investment, she appears to be a self-contained DPS who wants elemental mastery, making characters such as Sucrose, who can share part of her elemental mastery with the team, particularly useful alongside her. With higher investment, Mythia reportedly shifts more toward a sub-DPS and support role, making attack buffs more valuable. However, one of the biggest criticisms surrounding her is that some of her support capabilities may be locked behind Constellations, with reports suggesting that her intended synergy with the Cryo Sovereign may only become available at C2. It's understandable why that has caused frustration in the community. Most players will either use her at C0 or simply skip her altogether, so building an entire plan around needing C2 may not be the safest approach right now. Now let's move on to Valerie. According to the current early information, Valerie is a 4-star Electro Sword character, not a 5-star. Because she appeared as a large and imposing figure in the Snezhnaya trailer, many players expected her to be a 5-star character. Some even compared her to a potential third constellation Diana. But when you look at what she reportedly provides, she actually doesn't sound bad at all. Valerie is said to increase stellar reaction damage by 20% and provide 120 elemental mastery. For a 4-star character focused on elemental application, that is already a solid package, and even more importantly, almost everything she provides appears to be exactly what Mythia wants. There is another detail that is being overlooked. Valerie is reportedly designed to serve as an important support option for Cryo Sovereign teams. That means even players who decide not to pull for Mythia could potentially have a 4-star character capable of filling that role, which would be especially significant for free-to-play players. Her release timing is still somewhat uncertain. The current roadmap places her in version 7.3 alongside the Cryo Sovereign, but newer information has suggested that she could potentially be moved forward into version 7.2. However, most sources are still pointing toward version 7.3, so for now, that is the version we should treat as the more likely release window. Her element appears to be almost certain. In the official version 7.0 promotional material, a lightning-related symbol could reportedly be seen behind her head, suggesting that she is indeed an Electro character connected to the stellar keystone system. Her weapon type is less certain, with some reports claiming she uses a bow while others suggest a different weapon, so it would be better not to treat that detail as confirmed. Valerie is also reportedly designed as a support for the Cryo Sovereign and could potentially function in teams built around Sandrone or the Cryo Traveler. But her biggest feature may be her ability to reduce both cryo resistance and electro resistance at the same time. One character, two resistances. That is why comparisons to Baizhu have been appearing so often. Baizhu can reduce resistance depending on the elements present in the team, but certain setups require additional characters of the same element. In stellar conduct teams, his value can also become more complicated without C2. Denika, on the other hand, is reportedly able to participate in the reaction as an Electro character while simultaneously reducing both cryo and electro resistance. And this leads to an especially interesting point. The current information suggests that Danika could actually be more important to Cryo Sovereign teams than Mythia herself. In other words, this may be the clearest way to describe the relationship between versions 7.2 and 7.3. Mythia might not necessarily be the perfect partner for the Cryo Sovereign after all. So what can we actually say about the Cryo Sovereign herself? This is where the information becomes much more divided. Older and repeatedly circulated information has described the Cryo Sovereign as someone who is not primarily a main DPS, but rather a character who supports the entire stellar reaction system. However, newer and less reliable information suggests that she could instead be a personal damage-focused DPS. Neither possibility has been definitively confirmed or disproven. But if we look at the characters being designed around her, things become interesting. Denika is reportedly there specifically to reduce cryo and electro resistance for her. Valerie is supposedly designed as a major support option for her. There would be little reason to give a support character access to dual resistance reduction unless the Cryo Sovereign herself could make significant use of it by dealing substantial damage or remaining at the center of the team on the field. Because of that, the most natural interpretation right now is that the Cryo Sovereign could be a support and sub-DPS at C0. Focused on enabling and strengthening the overall stellar reaction system, while gaining more main DPS characteristics as her constellations increase. This would actually follow a pattern we have seen with several Archons. Characters like Raiden Shogun, Nahida, and Farina can already function as complete members of a team at C0, while additional constellations increasingly enhance their personal presence and damage. If the Cryo Sovereign follows a similar design philosophy, then both sides of the current information could make sense without necessarily contradicting each other. Finally, we need to separate the information by reliability. Not everything being reported about these three characters carries the same level of credibility. The one thing we can currently treat as confirmed is that Mythia possesses a stellar keystone, and the evidence for that comes directly from an in-game announcement. As for the release schedule, version 7.0 has already launched on August 12, version 7.1 is scheduled for September 23, and version 7.2 is expected on November 4. Version 7.3 should then arrive around the middle of December if the usual 6-week update cycle continues. But when it comes to actual gameplay data, there is currently nothing for these characters that has been backed up by reliable in-game data. In the current version 7.1 beta, the only characters with fully revealed early kits are Vesna and Vodyanitsa. For the version 7.2 and 7.3 characters, we still have no confirmed data to work with. So for now, all of this should be treated as early information rather than confirmed final kits. Once version 7.2 data begins appearing and we can verify the actual numbers and mechanics, we can revisit Mithia, Valerie, Danika, and the Cryo Sovereign with a much clearer picture. Until then, take all of these details with a grain of salt, because the most interesting part of these leaks may not be the numbers themselves, but the possibility that Genshin Impact is preparing to fundamentally change how stellar reactions work. And if Mythia really can turn the reaction itself into a source of damage, then version 7.2 could be much more important for the stellar system than it initially appears.